The sky was the first to speak, but no one understood its language. At first, the changes were subtle, almost beautiful. Sunsets bled across the horizon in colors no one had ever seen, hues of violet and emerald that shimmered like oil on water. People would gather on rooftops and hillsides, marveling at the spectacle, unaware they were watching the first whispers of a warning. Then came the second sun. It wasn't a sun at all, but a shimmering, ghost-like orb that would appear at noon, hanging pale and silent beside the real one. It cast no heat, no extra light, just an unsettling second shadow that followed everyone throughout their day. The scholars in the capital tried to explain it away. They spoke of atmospheric dust, of rare celestial alignments, phenomena that were unusual but ultimately harmless. The rulers, the Council of Elders, seized upon these explanations. They issued proclamations etched onto stone tablets and placed in every town square, reassuring the public that all was well, that the sky was merely putting on a show for their amusement. They called it the era of celestial wonders and even commissioned poets to write odes to the twin suns. But then the wonders grew stranger, and the reassurances began to feel hollow. The birds were the next to go. One morning the sky was filled with them sparrows, hawks, crows, all flying in a single chaotic mass, their calls a cacophony of panic. They didn't fly south or west. They flew straight up, higher and higher, until they were just black specks against the eerie glow of the twin suns. And then they were gone. The silence they left behind was heavier than any storm. The night became the hardest. The constellations, those ancient, familiar patterns that had guided travelers and lovers for millennia, began to shift. Stars would flicker and die out, only to reappear in a different part of the sky, forming new, menacing shapes that seemed to mock the old legends. The moon itself turned a sickly, rust-red color, casting a lurid, blood-like light upon the land. People started staying indoors after dusk, bolting their doors and shuttering their windows, but they couldn't shut out the unsettling, crimson glow that seeped through the cracks. In a small village nestled by the silent river, a carpenter named Cale lived with his young daughter, Ilara. Ilara had always loved the sky. She knew the names of the constellations her grandfather had taught her, and would spend hours charting their movements on parchment. But now she was afraid. She'd stopped going outside to play. One evening she came to Cale with her star charts, her small hands trembling. She pointed to a new, sprawling constellation they had started calling the Shattered Crown. Its stars were unnaturally bright, pulsing with a cold blue light. "Father," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "the stars are screaming. Can't you hear them?" Cale held her close, his heart aching. He couldn't hear the stars scream, but he could feel the wrongness of it all in his bones. The wood he worked with felt different, brittle. The river water had a strange, metallic taste. The very air felt thin, like it was being stretched to its breaking point. He had heard the council's proclamations, read the reassurances from the capital, but they meant nothing when his own child was afraid of the night sky. The ruler's denial grew more desperate as the phenomena escalated. A fine grey ash began to fall, dusting everything in a coat of spectral grey. It didn't come from any volcano. It just materialized in the air, tasteless and odorless. The council declared it a sign of immense prosperity, a silver rain that would enrich the soil. They organized grand festivals to celebrate it, forcing people to dance in the streets as the ash collected in their hair and on their shoulders. But the crops withered under the grey blanket, and a persistent rasping cough began to spread through the towns and villages. Kale saw the fear in his neighbours' eyes, the same fear he felt. They would gather in hushed groups, whispering about the old prophecies, the ones the council had long since outlawed. Prophecies that spoke of a sky that would turn against the world, of a great silence that would fall before the end. The prophecies spoke of the Sky Eater, a being of immense power that would consume the light. The new constellations, the falling ashet, all mirrored the ancient warnings. The council's motivations were not born of ignorance, but of a deep-seated arrogance and a desperate need to maintain control. They were the descendants of a long line of rulers who had built their power on the idea that they were the masters of their domain, that nature itself bent to their will. To admit that something was happening which they couldn't explain or control was to admit weakness, to shatter the illusion of their omnipotence. Their entire legacy was at stake. The High Elder, a man named Vorlag, whose face seemed carved from granite, believed that acknowledging the fear would cause more chaos than the phenomena themselves. Order, he would thunder in their private chambers. Order must be maintained at all costs. The people need strength, not doubt. They silenced the scholars who dared to suggest otherwise, reassigning them to remote outposts or, in some cases, making them disappear altogether. One night, the most terrifying sign of all appeared. From the heart of the shattered crown constellation, a crack appeared in the sky. It wasn't a meteor or a trick of the light. It was a jagged, black fissure, a tear in the very fabric of the night, and from it a profound and absolute darkness leaked out, extinguishing the stars around it. It looked like a wound in the heavens, and it grew larger with each passing night. There was no explaining this away. No festival could distract from a literal hole in the sky. This was when the whispers turned into open dissent. People began to defy the council's orders. They refused to work, refused to pay taxes. They gathered around makeshift shrines, praying to forgotten gods. In Kale's village, he and a few others decided to act. They began to dig, reinforcing their cellars, creating underground shelters stocked with what little food and water they could spare. It was a desperate act, a tacit admission that the world above ground was lost. As he worked, his hands raw and bleeding, Kale would look at Ilara, who was helping by packing dried herbs. He was no longer just protecting her from a frightening sky. He was preparing for a world without one. The council's response was swift and brutal. The city guard was dispatched to crush the nascent rebellion. Proclamations became threats. The era of celestial wonders was over. Now began the purification of doubt. Those who spoke of the sky wound or the prophecies were branded as traitors, enemies of order. But it was too late. The fear was no longer a quiet current beneath the surface. It was a raging flood, and it had washed away all faith in the rulers. The final sign came not as a spectacle, but as a sound. It started as a low hum, a vibration that resonated deep in the chest. It grew steadily, a bass note that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was the sound Cale's daughter had tried to describe the sound of the stars screaming. It rattled the windows in their frames and shook the very foundations of the houses. The animals that were left went mad, running blindly into walls. The hum grew into a deafening roar that drowned out all thought, all prayer, all hope. Cale grabbed Ilara and pulled her down into the cellar they had built, sealing the heavy wooden door behind them just as the world outside began to tremble violently. In the capital, the elders stood on the highest balcony of their spire, looking up at the black fissure that now dominated the sky. The roar was the loudest here, at the heart of their power. Vorlag stared, his face a mask of disbelief. He had believed that by controlling the people, he could control reality itself. He was wrong. The sky didn't care for his proclamations, his soldiers, or his order. The Sky Eater was coming. Down in the darkness of the cellar, Cale held Ilara, humming a simple lullaby to counter the world-ending roar from above. He didn't know if they would survive, if anyone would. He only knew that he had listened. He had listened to the fear in his daughter's voice, to the silence of the birds, to the whispers of the prophecies. While his rulers had looked at the sky and seen only what they wanted to see, he had seen the truth. The end had been written in the stars for all to see, but only those who were brave enough to be afraid had bothered to read it. And as the ground shook with the final, terrible arrival, he held on to the one thing the rulers had forgotten, the simple human instinct to look up and believe what you see. Thanks for watching. If this story captivated you, please like and subscribe for more tales from the edge of reality. Wait for the next episode. Chapter 7: The Final Warning.